In 1422, near the town of Německý Brod in central Bohemia, one of the most decisive but little-known battles in history took place. A visually impaired general led a small army of peasants, farmers, and townsfolk into battle against thousands of battle-tested crusaders sent by the Pope himself. The crusaders had knights in full plate armor, professional soldiers, and the blessing of the most powerful institution in Europe. The peasants had wagons, determination, and a commander who could barely see the battlefield. When the last crusader fled into the winter forest, several thousand bodies littered the battlefield, and another 500 or so drowned in the nearby Sasava River. Almost none of the casualties were the peasants. The sightless general was Žižka, and this is the battle history forgot. Before Žižka became the most feared commander in Europe, he was just another Czech mercenary grinding through Eastern Europe's endless wars. Born around 1360 into minor nobility, Žižka spent decades learning his craft the hard way, in the mud, blood, and chaos of medieval battlefields. By 1410, he'd already lost his right eye in combat. Many historians claim he lost the sight in his remaining eye around 1421, possibly during the siege of Rabai, though the exact details are uncertain. By 1422, when he marched on Německý Brod, he may have been completely blind. Rather than impede his effectiveness as a military leader, it seemed to sharpen his mind. Žižka understood something most noble-born commanders never grasped. Battles weren't won by individual heroics or cavalry charges. They were won by discipline, positioning, and forcing your enemy to fight on your terms, not theirs. Central Europe was at the epicenter of a brutal, persistent religious and political struggle that spanned centuries and culminated in the battle at White Mountain in 1620. The first major eruption of violence occurred during the Hussite Wars from 1419 to 1434. During this time, General Žižka led many military campaigns, and history records that he prevailed in all of them. When religious tensions exploded in Bohemia after the reformer Jan Hus was burned at the stake in 1415, Žižka was in his 50s. Most men his age were thinking about retirement, but Žižka seemed destined to become the sword and shield for the Hussite movement. This was a religious war, and religious wars tend to descend into levels of brutality that political wars rarely do. Jan Hus was only one of a vast number of wretched souls burned alive. Entire communities were wiped out, heretics executed without trial, and whole towns were incinerated. The Hussite movement wasn't just about religion, it was about power, language, and control. The Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire wanted to crush Czech reformers who dared translate the Bible into common language and challenge papal authority. For Žižka, this was personal. He joined the Hussite cause and immediately began revolutionizing how wars were fought. What makes Žižka extraordinary is not simply that he never lost a battle, it's the way that he won. His armies were not made up of knights or professional soldiers. They were Bohemian peasants and townsfolk, men with little training, poor equipment, and no formal military background. Rather than overwhelm and confuse his men with weaponry they did not know how to use, he leveraged the familiarity they had with their daily farming implements. Simple agricultural flails and pitchforks felt much more comfortable in the hands of his peasant farmers, so he developed training and drills designed to transform them into deadly fighters. It worked, even against the greatest powers in Europe. The game changer was a revolutionary military development, armored fighting vehicles. Now, these had been used elsewhere previously, but Žižka employed them like never before. The idea was deceptively simple. Take a heavy farm cart or a baggage wagon, reinforce it with wooden planks and metal, cut firing ports in the sides, and chain dozens of them together into a mobile fortress. Planks were hung below the wagons to prevent attackers from crawling underneath. A wagon would typically have about 20 peasant soldiers aboard, 2 drivers, 6 men with crossbows, 2 with guns, 4 with flails, which were weapons derived from farming tools. They were handles with a chain and striking head attached. 4 with halberds, another weapon that was a part axe and a part spear, and 2 with oblong shields called pavises. Suddenly, peasants with primitive weaponry could stand against armored knights on horseback. When arranged in a defensive square, known as a wagonberg, the wagons created instant fortifications anywhere on the battlefield. These armored wagons were, in many ways, the spiritual ancestors of mechanized warfare, a mobile gun platform that combined protection, firepower, and mobility. Knights charging at full speed would slam into a wall of wood and iron, then get shredded by crossbow bolts fired from protected positions. Žižka trained farmers to fight in disciplined formations, to reload and fire in sequence, to hold their ground when every instinct screamed for them to run. Žižka is widely regarded as one of the first commanders to coordinate infantry, cavalry, and artillery to act as a unified tactical system. He used terrain like a chess master, always choosing battlefields that negated enemy advantages. His preference was to position his army at the highest and steepest hillsides available, forcing enemy cavalry to dismount and ascend on foot. And he won. Battle after battle against supposedly superior forces, Žižka's peasant army crushed opposing armies, often many times larger. At Suramej in March 1420, Žižka proved his war wagon tactics could work against a real army. His outnumbered force crushed the attackers so thoroughly that they fled, leaving their supplies and wounded behind. At Vihyšrad later that same year, he demonstrated that his methods worked even in siege warfare. But these were just warm-ups. The real test came in January 1422 at a town called Německý Brod, known today as Hussite Brod, renamed at the end of World War II. Pope Martin V had declared a crusade against the Hussite heretics. This wasn't a border skirmish or a local dispute. This was the full weight of Catholic Europe descending on Bohemia, certain to end the rebellion once and for all. On January 8, 1422, at Habry, Žižka shattered that certainty. His war wagons and disciplined peasant army broke the Crusader force so completely that survivors fled east toward the town of Německý Brod. Žižka pursued. For 2 days, his forces chased the retreating Crusaders across the frozen Bohemian terrain. The Crusaders were exhausted, disorganized, and their command structure fractured. They reached Německý Brod on January the 10th, hoping the town and the winter conditions around the Sazava River would provide some defensive advantage. But Žižka saw something different, a killing ground. Here's how a blind man orchestrated a massacre. His officers described the terrain in detail, the town layout, the frozen river, the hills, the roads the Crusaders would use to escape. Žižka built a mental map and positioned his forces not only to defend, but to herd the enemy exactly where he wanted them. When Žižka's war wagons closed in, the panicked Crusaders had limited options. Either stand and face this ragtag army that had just defeated them at Habry, or flee. Escape meant retreating across the frozen river, and it seemed like the only choice, exactly what Žižka wanted. As the retreat bottlenecked at the frozen Sazava River, hundreds of soldiers, including a large contingent of Hungarian cavalry, pressed onto the ice. Under their weight, sections of it gave way. More than 500 men drowned in the icy water, dragged to the bottom by their heavy armor. The survivors scattered into the winter forest, but Žižka's forces pursued them for miles, turning retreat into annihilation. When the killing finally stopped, historians estimate that over 2,000 soldiers lay dead, in addition to the hundreds who had drowned. Žižka's losses were minimal, perhaps a few dozen men. Despite being vastly outnumbered, a blind general had just hunted down and destroyed a highly trained professional fighting army. Žižka died in 1424, possibly from the plague, though some sources suggest complications from his old wounds. Legend says that he requested his skin be made into war drums so he could still lead his men into battle even after death. Whether that's true or medieval propaganda doesn't really matter. The legend itself shows how his soldiers saw him as an unstoppable force, someone who couldn't be defeated, even by death itself. So, why did history forget Jan Žižka? The answer is brutally simple. He fought for the losing side. The Hussites eventually fractured into competing factions, weakened by internal disputes and constant warfare. By the 1430s, moderate Hussites negotiated a compromise with the Catholic Church, and the radical elements were crushed at the Battle of Lipany in 1434. Žižka's victories became inconvenient reminders that peasants with the right tactics and leadership could defeat the nobility. The Church had no interest in celebrating a heretic general, and the Holy Roman Empire certainly didn't want to memorialize the man who'd humiliated their armies repeatedly. But Žižka's influence never really died. His war wagon tactics influenced military thinking for centuries. You can see echoes of his mobile fortress concept in everything from 19th century wagon trains to modern mechanized infantry. His emphasis on firepower over melee combat, mobility over static defense, and discipline over individual heroics became standard military doctrine. The Hussites' use of early firearms helped accelerate the end of the knight-dominated battlefield, and is proof that well-trained commoners could defeat professional soldiers planted seeds that would eventually grow into modern military organization. Jan Žižka proved that genius doesn't need eyes to see the battlefield. He demonstrated that innovation beats tradition, that tactics trump numbers, and that the right commander can turn farmers into an army that terrifies empires. The Battle of Německý Brod should be taught alongside Cannae and Agincourt as a masterpiece of military strategy. Instead, it's a footnote in Czech history, unknown to most of the world.